The next thing we notice within Article 2 is that in the same vein that we were told that legislators were serve a certain amount of time and have a tenure of office, we also see that when we start looking at the presidency. The tenure of office for a president, full terms for president, are 4 years. I think that 4-year period is kind of interesting in the fact that we just got done talking about Congress. Congress has a bicameral body. House members serve 2-year terms, and senators serve 6-year terms. So the president is surrounded by Congress. House members always seem to have a more updated kind of attaboy, you should hold the job. And senators are saying, hey, what's the rush? We're here for a really long time. And then the presidency's kind of in between. Now, we do know that presidents are allowed to serve 2 of these 4-year consecutive terms. And under special circumstances laid out in the 22nd Amendment, presidents can serve up to half of a previous president's term and still be elected to a 4-year term and re-elected to a 4-year term, which means that presidents can serve only 10-year maximums. That's very different than congressmen that have no such restrictions. You mentioned a House member and a Senate member in previous classes. John Dingell from Trenton, Michigan is the longest serving member of the House, and he served well over 50 years in the House. And we also mentioned Senator Byrd from West Virginia that served 4+ decades in the Senate. But presidents can only serve a maximum of 10 years according to the Constitution's 22nd Amendment. No president can serve longer than 10 years. It just can't happen. And then at this point, one of you would say, what about FDR? FDR was elected, re-elected, re-elected, and re-elected. And if the son of the bitch wouldn't have died, he'd probably still be our president. Did we just forget that we had this limit of 10-year maximum and we allowed him to serve 13 and a half years until he passed on? And the answer is the 22nd Amendment came after FDR died. We realized that if you had a single chief executive who was elected to office, re-elected to office, re-elected to office, re-elected to office, maybe you don't have a president anymore. Maybe you got a king. This country was founded on a distrust for a king. It's what caused us to have the revolution. So we passed the 22nd Amendment to kind of cease that. We don't trust centralized rule. We're not going to let someone take that. In addition to providing for a term of office and a tenure length to the job, the Constitution also provides for the removal of a president. I will also say that this same proviso allows for the removal of other federal officials, but we talk about this removal process with the presidency simply because we've got some really high-profile examples of this removal process. This removal process is known as impeachment. We've had 3.5 presidents go through the impeachment process. I know that sounds like a weird number, but Andrew Johnson was the first president that went through impeachment. In fact, he survived the Senate by 1 vote. Richard Nixon resigned before he could be impeached on the floor of the House and removed by the Senate, simply because he was pretty good at counting votes. He understood that he was going to be impeached and going to be removed, and he resigned before any of that could happen. Bill Clinton was impeached, but not removed from office. And Donald Trump was also impeached, but not removed from office. So we do want to talk about that process of impeachment. More particularly, this doesn't specifically have to do with the president, although those are our high examples of them. This is a legislative function. The legislature is in charge of impeachment, of impeaching presidents or federal judges or other public officials. Because Congress is based on duality and we have a bicameral body, each chamber has its own role to play in the process. House of Representatives is vested with bringing articles of impeachment. The Constitution helps us with this, actually lists some crimes that are so bad that they are impeachable. Those crimes are bribery, treason, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Well, typically in our judicial system, we tend to think of a high crime as being a felony, and a misdemeanor as being a less significant crime. Usually felonies are punishable by more than a year in prison, and a misdemeanor is by less than a year. Well, bribery and treason are pretty bad, and I think we can think of some other really bad crimes that probably are impeachable, like murder and rape and armed robbery, but you can be impeached for misdemeanors, like minor in possession, like jaywalking. It's up to the House of Representatives to determine that. They are vested with bringing charges against presidents and other federal office holders. Have they done something that the Congress thinks is significant enough to bring articles of impeachment? And once those articles of impeachment are drawn up, you need a majority vote to impeach. That's what we saw with Donald Trump. A majority of the House voted to impeach. That's what we saw with Bill Clinton. A majority of the House voted to impeach. That's what we saw with President Johnson, Andrew Johnson. It's also what we saw in the Judiciary Committee with Nixon. Remember, we touched last time on the committee seems to be do the primer work for the institution. They develop the expertise, the specialization. They look at these problems and attempt to solve them. The Judiciary Committee has the jurisdiction of the Constitution. Since the Constitution says that federal office holders can be impeached via this process, it is that committee that investigates, and that committee, as a majority, voted to impeach Nixon. And since we know the number one predictor of why congressmen vote as party, it just so happened that the majority party in the Judiciary Committee was the majority party in the House, so he was going to get impeached. After the House has a majority vote on articles of impeachment, the case then moves to the second chamber, which is the Senate. The Senate holds the trial. The Senate holds the trial with the help of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to deem if those bad things that the House found, whether it be bribery, treason, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, is so significant that the president or other federal official should be removed from office, should lose their job. Major change that we see when we move to the Senate is we no longer have a majority vote in order to get this done. In the Senate, you need 2/3 of a vote, a supermajority, to remove that president/federal official from their job. And what we haven't seen in any of our examples of the president being impeached is that they've been able to get 2/3 of a vote to get them removed. Johnson survived by 1 vote. Nixon resigned before it could happen. Clinton on some of the charges and Trump on some of the charges couldn't even get to 50 votes. In some cases they got more than 50, but not to 2/3 to remove. Now we do have examples of, for instance, federal judges not only being impeached in the House by a majority vote, but also being removed by the Senate with a 2/3 vote. We just haven't seen that with the president. Another important aspect of a formalized relationship dealing with the president is also tied to FDR. Not only was the 22nd Amendment put in because it appeared as if we were developing a king as opposed to a president, we also were worried that when we got news after FDR finally passed away that it's completely possible that the last year of his presidency he was too incapacitated to do the job. And that kind of put the fear of God in many, particularly lawmakers, that said, well, we have this Constitution that says the powers of the presidency devolve to the vice president if the president dies or becomes incapacitated or resigns the job. But if the president is incapacitated for a period of time and something bad were to happen to the vice president, we're kind of screwed. So after FDR dies and everyone says the right stuff, they realize that they're going to have to create legislation to kind of clarify someone who could hold this job in case. So they passed the Federal Succession Act, which adds names that the Constitution has already put in place. Now, because laws cannot supersede the Constitution, the Presidential Succession Act had to put in place what the Constitution had already clarified, and that was the president is the president, and if something were to happen to the president, the vice president would take over. And then the piece of legislation started to add names. They added the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem. And then when the country started, we had three departments: the Department of State, the Department of Treasury, and at that time it was called the Department of War. It has now since changed its names to the Department of Defense. They were our original kind of bureaucratic departments, so they go at the top of the list. And then as we've created other departments, we put them in line based on their creation. So the Secretary of Homeland Security is number 18 on our list because the Department of Homeland Security is the most recent department that's been created. So now the thought process is at least we have a number of persons and offices that have some legitimate claim to holding the presidency in case something really bad happens. Now, for the most part, presidential succession just doesn't come up. In fact, it typically comes up once a year at the State of the Union address. For anyone that's ever watched the State of the Union, at 9 o'clock, all the TV stations come on, and you see this guy in the House of Representatives open doors and with a really big mouth say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." And the president walks into the House of Representatives to go give his speech. Well, it takes a while for the president to enter the chamber, shake hands with everyone he needs to shake hands with on his way to get to the podium, and there's nothing really going on other than the president's walking. So you don't want to have dead air on television, so the commentators will always say, "Oh, the president's talking to Representative so-and-so or Senator what's-his-name. Oh, there's the members of the Supreme Court." And then they'll get closer and they'll say, "Oh, there's the president's cabinet." And then inevitably they'll say, "Oh, by the way, Secretary of fill-in-the-blank isn't here tonight." When I first heard that, I found that to be odd. I was like, your boss has given his only really good speech of the year and you don't show up. Well, it's by design. I went to all this work to kind of expand what the Constitution said in terms of succession, which, by the way, the Constitution was pretty vague. President to vice president, and they were pretty much done. So federal lawmakers got together and they added these names from the Speaker down to the Homeland Security Secretary. They never want to have all these people in the same place at the same time. What happens if a bomb goes off? Then I'm in the same position I was at before I wrote the piece of legislation. I don't have anyone with any kind of standing to hold this job. So typically, the president asks one of his cabinet members to go to the bunker in a hermetically sealed mayonnaise jar in case something really bad happens. There will be somebody on this list who can take over. As I mentioned, the Succession Act doesn't come up very often besides that one time during the year, but there was also some concern at different times in our history that if something were to happen to both the president and the vice president, we would be in a kind of an awkward place. Even though the Speaker of the House, even though the President pro tem could legally take the job, you're kind of messing now with multiple branches of our government. You can't be Speaker of the House and President at the same time. You can't be a senator and be the pro tem and be president at the same time. You'd be messing up multiple institutions. So you never want to get past the vice president. Ideally, you never want to get past the vice president. At least the vice president has the same constituency as the president does for holding their job. They're the only national kind of constituents. So you never really want to get past there. So the thought process is that we created this piece of legislation in case, but we never really want to use it. So shortly after we passed the Presidential Succession Act, we also passed the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. The 25th Amendment does a number of things. One of the more important things that it does is it mandates that there always be a vice president. That if a vice president takes over the powers of the president and moves up one notch on the ladder to become president, the first order of business is not to hug your spouse and give a kiss on the forehead to your children. The first order of business is to get a vice president. There's also another proviso in the 25th Amendment which allows for the removal of presidential powers from a president who's incapacitated. If the vice president and half the cabinet vote, they can remove powers if the president isn't able to give up the power on their own. But we don't want to get past the vice president because then we would be in uncharted, difficult territories. And the last aspect that I want to talk about in terms of the office of presidents is that we have to realize that being president is a job like any other. With it come certain rewards and certain drawbacks. When it comes to rewards or benefits for being president, we know full well that presidents get a salary. Currently, presidents make between $400,000 and $500,000 a year, and to you and I, that sounds like a lot of money. Until you realize that the backup second baseman for the Tigers makes a heck of a lot more money than that. We'll also tell you that if you're president, you get the White House, which is, if you talk to any real estate person, a really good piece of land. Real estate people always tell you it's about location, 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 and 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is a pretty good location. Were to get bored of the White House, you get Camp David, a retreat home in Maryland. You also get cool modes of transportation. You get Air Force One, which if you have to take transatlantic or transcontinental trips, it's not a bad way to go. If you have to go for short jaunts, like you want to go from the White House to Camp David, you use the helicopter. If you just need to go across town to give a speech at the Georgetown Hotel, you take the presidential limo, which, by the way, takes tank hits. One of the cool things about all these modes of transportation is that you don't have to drive any of them. You have a driver for all of them. And even better than that, you never get stuck in traffic because you always have the right of way. Presidents also get a pension. They get office and staff allotments. They also get the Secret Service. Now, I know some people will call them bodyguards, but I got to tell you, Secret Service agents, we go through painstaking tasks to find people that jump in front of bullets, jump on top of bombs. That's not what you find when you're a rock star or an actor and you hire a bodyguard. They run away when things get bad. Secret Service agents will take a bullet for you. All of those are pretty impressive. But despite the fact that there are many rewards for holding the job as president, I've never really heard somebody say, that'd be a great job, I want it. And that's because everyone realizes being president's a really crappy job. Because yes, there are some really cool rewards, but there are some major drawbacks. First drawback of being president is that there's a small privacy loss, not just to you, but your spouse, your kids, your friends. Everything you've ever done, everything they've ever done becomes front page news. There are no secrets. If you cheated on a third grade spelling test, we're going to find out. You smoked that blunt in 8th grade, we're going to find out. You cheated on your spouse at that, we're going to find out. And I think maybe most presidents might not mind the world finding out their flaws, but they also have to make that call for all their loved ones. And that's got to be difficult to do. The second major drawback is that there's a small amount of job stress being president. I think on your official business card of being president, it's got the seal and it says President of the United States. And then in italics, it says leader of the free world, no pressure. You have to realize that every single day you're president, at least half your own country is going to hate you. That doesn't even count people outside the United States, which probably consistently hate you. In fact, there's someone who actually takes a picture of a president on the first day they're inaugurated and the last day they leave. That's not 4 years. That's, 24 years. That's dog 4 years. Nobody looks the same leaving the presidency as they did coming in. Well, Reagan looked very similar. He had jet black hair going in and jet black hair coming out, but heck, that was shoe polish. Look at Barack Obama. He was president for 8 years. It looks more like 28 years. Bill Clinton, after he was president for 8 years, a short time after he was president, there was a press conference in Arkansas at a hospital where a doctor came out and said, we just performed a routine quadruple bypass on the former president. I'm sorry, that phrase doesn't make sense. A routine quadruple bypass? Can't think of a job that's much worse than being president. You don't make that good of a living. By the way, if you're the head CEO of the country, which is basically what a president is, you're on par with a Forbes 500, aren't you? Well, they make a heck of a lot more money. You want to have power? Be a federal judge. No one knows who you are, so they're not trying to kill you. You want power and prestige, there are probably better places to get it than being president. Having said all that, we've got plenty of examples of people that wanted to be president and have become president. We've got 45 case studies in our 230 plus years. The one thing that I know about them, if I want to understand how those people that held the job compare to the people that hold it today, is that one of the more dominant features that I kind of see is that Article 2 kind of runs your life. Article 2 created this particular job. It provides the parameters for this job. And it provides those enumerated or formalized criteria for getting the job and using the accoutrements of the job. One thing I notice is that Article 2 that existed when George Washington was president is the same Article 2 that exists for presidents in 2020. Those same shorter list of formalized powers are the same as they were before. Yet the one thing that is clear as anything is that we view the presidency much different today in the 21st century than they did when the presidency was created. The office was considered to be an afterthought back in the start of the United States. If you were a politician and you wanted to be as best you could be, and you wanted the Holy Grail, you didn't dream of becoming president. You dreamed of becoming Speaker of the House. You dreamed of becoming majority leader in the Senate. Why? We thought we were creating legislative government. We thought that's where the power was. It wasn't the afterthought job, it was the job. Presidencies were inferior. brightest would become presidents. And although you can make a case that there were some really great early presidents, Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, there's also, for every George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, there's a Zachary Taylor. What that suggests is that something has changed. That from the inception of the country, where the founders believed that they were creating a certain kind of government, something has been altered. And that thing that has been altered has been the ascendancy of the presidency. It's no longer seen as an afterthought job. It's not seen as an inferior job. Yes, it's got fewer words. Yes, it's got less powers, but it's almost impossible to look at this job anymore as being inferior. The question becomes, why is that? What has happened in our 200 plus years that has shifted the role of the presidency from being an afterthought to being at least a co-equal branch, if not, many would argue, the most important branch, the imperial presidency? The development of the presidency has occurred over time, and it's occurred because presidents have been able to take their formalized power, which is small in comparison to the legislative branch, and bring their own informal powers to bear.